So, today we will see how to do this. Which we can also turn it with just a simple tick into turning it into this. Or of course, if we do not care about making it look a bit cinematic, we can also do it like this. Okay, so basically what we are going to do is see how we can make the takedowns. Right now we're only going to focus about making one, or initializing and creating the environment where it will allow us to do each of these cases. Okay, it basically either it is cinematic or not, or the one with the X-ray. It's pretty much the same thing. We have the same animations, but we also keep do a few checks to see, and there is a bit of setup to create the skeleton inside the enemy, which we're going to talk about. And it's also the same if you want to do takedowns from another angle. Okay, we're going to focus on how we can start initializing and creating the environment to make a cutscene, basically, because that's basically the takedown is basically a cutscene. And then we will see what we can do and what we can add to make basically play different animations based on the angle you are approaching. So if you are attacking him from the front, then it's going to play a different animation, because in this case, let me start over again. Even if I attack him from straight forward, what it's just going to do is, of course, since I check if I am inside the collider to start initializing the takedown, I need to be pretty much around here. But even if this is the case, then it's going to basically set them up to the correct position, or to the position I actually want. Now, let's go back into a level. Basically, let me bring my prefab. Basically, we're going to create this thing over here, a new line. This new line is the camera path. Well, before we do that, we're going to create an empty game object that's going to go inside our third-person controller, which is the takedown holder, which is going to control and hold all the different takedowns, and we will have a list that has its takedown. We only need to assign, well, the ID is for referencing the takedown based on items or weapons we have, but we're not going to see this in this video. And we're only going to assign the takedowns. Okay, so basically one that is a cinematic and the one that is not cinematic, I'm controlling it this way. Okay, so we will take them as different even though they are using the same animation. We only will assign the holder, and we will take everything else from script. And both of all the stuff are going to be populated between the takedown. We are going to be populated with a script. Now we need to assign a new. If you want to have the X-rays on your player, on your game, like it is in Sniper Elite, okay, you need to assign this over here. Now, of course, in Sniper Elite they probably do it with shaders instead of layers, but why write code when we can do it with just a few clicks? So every takedown is going to include one game object, different game object that has the takedown timeline, that also needs an animator that has another animator that it's going to include basically an animation. Now this animation is actually an empty animation. It doesn't have any, but it really has nothing, no keyframes, only events. Okay, so with this way we can use this as a sequencer and set up events like that. So this basically says we only have to create the functions inside our takedown timeline over here, okay, and say that make them as events basically when we are starting. So the first frame, change the camera target, and I can pass around to see the camera target. So for instance, I have a list that holds all the camera targets I want them to have inside the cutscene. Whenever I say cutscene or takedown, or I mean this, or cinematic, I mean this one. Okay, so change camera target for instance, and I have assigned it to change it to 1. So it's going to skip the first one, the 0, and it's going to go straight to 1, which from over here I can assign, if I want, I can assign a transform, or I can assign a bone from the animators. Since this is a takedowns, that means we're always going to use animators. And also if I want to be assigned from the on a bone that is on the player's animator. That bone, of course, I do that on another event. So I have basically I preset up the transfers I want to focus. So what I'm doing is focus first on the head of the enemy, and then he hits him. The first one we're going to basically use this one as a dummy, and we will change the event when we initialize the takedown to focus on this transform. And it's basically the target, the camera target transform is where we want our camera to look. Okay, so it initializes with this. You can set this everything to whatever you want to have. Okay, then it's going to learn to look into the head of the enemy. Then it's going to learn to look into the left ring intermediate of the player. Of course, you can set this everything you want. Okay, but I want to do. I knew before that I want to focus and make a zoom in on the hand that holds the knife. Okay, so that's why I set this up. And continuing on, I can have the hips, and so basically when he lands the hit with the knife. Okay, so with this I can basically storyboard the way I want the camera to hit, where the camera wants to look. Now I have a few variables, if it's X-ray or not, which we're not seeing it. We are updating it from the top script. And also the other stuff that we need is of course the takedown animator, camera event, the player and enemy. All these are set it up by script. Now the other thing we need to know is the info and the total length. Now what the total length is basically the executions animation. Let me click this one. It's basically the length over here. If you bring it back, this is for the enemy. If I go into the player, you will see that it says 415, 420, and it ends at 420. Okay, so that's basically the most some important detail we need to have. The total length of the whole animation is going to be for 420. Now, the other info we need to know is the name of the animation that is inside, and I should actually lock this. The name of the animation that is inside our execution based on the animator. Okay, this is the animator we are using, where we have everything. Okay, execution, and basically our naming convention. The execution player, okay, base 1, and the other execution enemy, base 1. So basically I need to pass on panim, the player animator, I need to pass the name of this one, since we're crossfade or we just hit directly play. Crossfade timer is how much time it's going to take to actually crossfade between the animation. If you have 0 crossfade, that means the transition will be instant. Same for the enemy. If we want to have a delay for the enemy before we actually start playing his animation, we can set this up. And the other thing is how much is offsetted by the position of the enemy. So if the enemy is here, for the animation to play correct, we need to have an offset from the enemy's relative position. So -1 will be around over here. Of course, this is in local variable, in local position, so we need to turn that into a public variable. And the other stuff, I'm not using this. Yeah, I'm not. Okay, so the takedown animator is basically this one, this animator. The player and enemy, these are a few other references that we're going to see that goes over our models. We talk about the camera targets, if we want to be X-ray or not. The camera rig is where we are placing the camera. So basically this line, this path over here is the same as the ones we are using for the cover position or climb position and whatnot. Okay, but we will indicate with this the way the camera is going to move. So we have this curve over here, and I can place it wherever I want. Now, keep in mind that this, if I change this over here, then the animation will still play, but it's still going to focus on the targets we set up beforehand. But it's going to look like it's from above. Okay, so this way we can have a bit of variation with that. But I'm going to keep this one over here. Okay, so we need to also assign the camera path. Okay, and if we want to play any particles on our event, I also have a list of particles which I set up the prefab, of course. If we want to place it on a bone, okay, and if that bone belongs to the player, then we set up the bone. Otherwise, we can set it up on a target transform, and we can have a target position or target rotation, and so on. The perk over here is basically the percentage, which is the percentage the camera moves around. This really has no need to be public or not, but it helps sometimes to visualize. Now, if we want it to be a cinematic takedown or a jump cut, these are just booleans, but I'm basically updating this one from this script over here. Not the takedown taller. I'm updating this one from takedown cinematic. So basically takedown cinematic, a more appropriate name will be takedown manager, but I thought that later. So back to our takedown. We have our timeline. We explain what goes inside takedown, and the takedown weapon is a weapon reference, just like the ones we have into our weapon manager. Okay, and we use it so that we basically disable all the weapons. We place them on the holster positions, or we enable the holster models. Okay, and since it's a melee weapon, it's not going to try and enable another weapon, but it's going to enable another weapon model, which in this case it's the knife on the other hand. Okay, it's this knife. Now, let me go find it. Takedown. Basically, these are the timelines. So for the other timeline, which is also non-cinematic, the camera path and the takedown won't even matter. So you do not even need that. The takedown will actually matter. The camera path won't matter. Okay, because it's basically the same, but it has cinematic takedown unticked. And there is also the jump cut is when you are initiating the animation, if you want them to lerp to the position of the execution, so basically the offset position from the enemy, or if you want it to instantly teleport to there. Okay, but since this one is not changing, it's not closing one camera to open. Well, you're actually not closing the camera, you're not teleporting the camera to one place or the other. Okay, then it wouldn't look that good to teleport the character. So instead, we lurk him behind the enemy, and then we do all the animations. Now, for the player and the enemy, as for the enemies, there are CP dummies. They only have the component of takedown reference, which they need to have for them to say that we have the references we need to get and play the animation. And they also have a takedown collider, which has a box collider in here. It has a rigid body because there's no rigid body on the upper level. Okay, and of course it's also kinematic. And when they are over here, it's basically a trigger that says to the script, pass the reference to the player model, to the third person controller. Now, I had to change a few stuff. Well, before we go into that, let's say that inside our third person controller, we also have on the top of our third person controller, not where we have our takedown manager, we will also have another script, which is the takedown references, and takedown player, which is basically the input we have to do for the player. I'm keeping this different from the input handler, but you probably should keep this one inside the input handler, okay, because as I said before, most of this stuff are pretty much showing you how you can do stuff like this, but if you want to implement it, it's better to keep organized and keep all your input over here. So if you want to use the custom input manager we saw in a few videos ago, okay, then you need to add it to just be more organized than what you see over here. And in case I've forgotten to mention what these all are, although I think I haven't I basically take all the start and updates from each script, and I've all added them inside the state manager, except the input handler, since the input handler is only for the player, and also the item pickup behavior, which you also should be using it inside, probably integrate it either on input handler or just keep it like that, but also update it from the input handler or something like that. And so we're not really going to focus on optimizing these two scripts, just going to see how we can do what we want to do. Now, let's see the actual scripts. We're going to focus first with creating for the takedowns. We're going to focus on the takedown timeline. So, as I said before, the timeline name, the takedown cinematic, which is the main. Let me close this and because intelligence didn't work. So the takedown is the class where we have it inside the takedown manager. So yeah, let's first see these few classes we need to do. Yeah. Okay, so basically we have the takedown. What we need to know about the takedown, we need to know its ID, because we want to know what takedown we're going to play, although we will see that later when we implement different executions based on the weapon you have, or if you want it to be unarmed and all that. Yeah, we're not actually going to see it, just saying that what you're going to use the ID. The important stuff we need to know: the total length, which is what I said, the total length of the animation. The takedown info is this one: the player's animation, the crossfader timer, the enemy's animation, the name of the animations, crossfader timer. If we want to play to delay playing the enemy's animation, if we want the offset we want to have, and these two can actually go away. Okay, the animator for the camera, which holds the events, the camera path, which is the Bezier curve we used, the takedown references for the player and the enemy, which is another script we're going to see, the camera target index, and we also do not need to use this in the inspector, so we do not want to see this in the inspector, so we can hide it, and we call takedown camera targets, which is what I said about the camera targets. Okay, the target transform, if we want to assign it on bone, then select the bone. If we want to take the bone from the player, and if you want to directly jump, make the camera look directly on the new target transform, or if you want it to jump to looking at the. Okay, and we will see in a bit what this all are. And then if we want it to be, if the takedown is an X-ray, the camera rig, which is basically the game object that moves upon the path that we have set it up on the camera path over here. And the particle for takedown is basically the particles we can play at any time using an event. Okay, and we saw we will see where everything, all of these are. This is the actual array we are playing, but to set it up we simply have we create the prefab and we assign to this particle game object, and for every particle game object we find, we assign it over here and then play this. Now let's go see the takedown holder. It's the one we have into our takedown manager, which is path string ID. Okay, the timeline, which is assigned by script, so we only need to pass the game object that holds both the camera timeline and the camera path. Let's go to takedown timeline. Takedown timeline. The takedown that we saw in the takedown manager, the takedown cinematic, the percentage we are upon the camera path, our own delta, since we have we have our own time manager, so we need to store our own delta time. Okay, the target position, the target transform, if it's a cinematic takedown, if it's a jump cut, the takedown weapon, and when we want to initialize the takedown timeline, we basically need to pass the takedown reference of the player and the takedown reference of the enemy. We assign them over here inside the takedown, and if the main is null, then pass the main, and if it's not a cinematic takedown, also make the X-ray to be false. And we do this because we basically call the initialize every time we need to change the enemy. It doesn't help. We can basically, this is an encapsulation, so we basically, it doesn't hurt to reassign the player. So since we're not really doing too much with this, but we have the takedown enemy, we basically change the enemy over here. Okay, so instead of an update, we have a public void of tick. So this is basically the same as the update. And we can say if the takedown is not an X-ray and we have a takedown of X-ray, then simply go and say on the takedown we also have a camera that is it's called an X-ray, and we basically go and disable. Now what the X-ray camera is on our third person camera holder. I've created a new, we have our basic camera, which is this one, but I've also created a new camera that renders only the depth and has a culling mask of the X-ray. Now when you have two cameras and also the depth is higher than the previous layer. So basically it's what renders the skeletons on top of your own, on top of the other models. Okay. The only problem with using two cameras is that the image effects, basically not all of them are going to play, can play. Where basically the first camera will not even render any image effects. Of course, we are keeping them open right now. So in an actual build, you basically want to delete or you want to disable the image effects from the down camera. Okay, and I also have them inside the top camera, which basically renders the X-ray layer. Okay, now some other stuff, of course, the depth of field, for example, will not work in a camera that only renders the depth and only renders one thing, which in this case is the X-ray layer. So to differentiate between the main camera and the main camera X-ray, I also have made a new script which is called camera references, and I assigned the normal camera and the X-ray camera. Okay, and I also made it a singleton, and by default I simply disable the X-ray camera. Now if on the takedown the X-ray camera over here is not assigned, well, I think we are assigning them to script, so anyway, let's move on. So let's go back to takedown timeline. Okay, this is the update. If it's not X-ray, just close the X-ray camera. If we have a target position, if we have a target transform, then the target position will be that target transform's position. Then we take our main we have a new transform that we're going to call camera helper into our main, so that is our takedown cinematic. Okay, since we are using them, we basically can just set this all up into the takedown manager or takedown cinematic, and reuse the same references for inside the takedown timeline. So it will probably be wiser to use this one, to see this one first. And yeah, let's see this one first actually, or let's put a holder over here. Okay, we have a reference to the time manager. It's public because we want to also take it into account from the takedown timeline. If we are running the takedown, if we have initialized the takedown, the current index, if we want to enable the X-ray, our list of takedowns, camera helper, the current active timeline for the takedown. If we are in debugged mode, okay, we're not using that. The X-ray layer and the default layer. And we have a game object, which is the main camera rig, which is the one we're using for our third person camera holder. Okay, this one, which we were always using. The main camera, the actual main camera. And the current field of view, which is we store the current field of view for the camera when we are changing it, the reference to the player and the enemy, and then we store the previous camera position. On start, we initialize, of course, the time manager. We create a new game object for the camera helper, and we say init takedown holders. To initialize the takedown holders, basically it goes to each one we have assigned it to our list, okay, and it gets the component it's hidden, the takedown timeline, and assigns it, and then closes it. If in debug mode, you basically need to initialize the player reference and the enemy reference from over here. Yeah. Then in update, if you are running the takedown, of course we want to store the takedown, and we take the takedown from our takedown list for our timeline from the actual takedown. We store the current takedown, and then we say initialize the takedown. To initialize the takedown, we need to pass the takedown holder, and we say if it's a cinematic takedown, our timeline says that it's cinematic takedown. We change the cursor lock state to confined. Then we say we store the camera position, the actual position the camera has right now. We reparent it to that camera timeline transform. We reparent the main camera to the current timeline. Then we say we change the local position to be vector 3, 0, local rotation to be also 0. If our current timeline says that on our takedown it's X-ray, then we set up the X-ray transform. The X-ray transform is basically the X-ray camera, but we do not want any reference with the X-ray camera. We only want the transform basically. So we get it from the camera reference get instance X-ray transform. We set this up, both its position as local rotation, and we parent it under our own current timeline. So basically what it does is goes, since this game object, the takedown, that has the takedown timeline, will have the position, let's actually, and this will not work, because we need to come from the main menu, but that will be a little bit of a problem. So let's save it, let's move to main menu. Basically because the actual camera rig, the camera path, yeah, let's see. Okay, I'm pressing X. What happened in that one frame? We close the camera holder that we were using on our camera, on basically our major controller, or third person controller. Okay, we close that. We close our camera holder, and then we move our camera inside our takedown main camera. Okay, camera path. We come over here. So we close this one, but we took the camera and assigned it underneath the takedown, the game object that has the takedown timeline. Why we do that is because we make this game object to follow the camera path. So if I click to move the frame forward, you will see that the camera actually follows this game object. Same for if I had the X-ray inside my if I had the X-ray also open, it's going to follow the same path also. We do that because we basically want both of these cameras to actually show the exact same thing, otherwise it's going to break the effect. Okay, moving on. Okay, we set up the same position as the main camera, and we say that also make it active, and then assign the X-ray camera from the camera reference get distance, the X-ray, into the current timeline. And we say we close the main camera rig. And then after we have set all this up, we open the takedown holder game object inside our takedown holders, inside our list basically of takedowns. Okay, after that we also reassign the X-ray. We basically say we take the game if it's X-ray, if the takedown is an X-ray or not, with the boolean X-ray we have over here. Basically it's just a simple way to control if we want it to be X-ray or not. And then we call the current timeline to initialize with this main, so since this is the main takedown manager, and we pass the player reference and the enemy references. Basically the player and the enemy references, the takedown references in general, is just a simple script that has two lists, one with the regular skin meshes, that is all the meshes that are assigned into an actual animation. Okay, but they do not have, but they are not part of the skeleton. So if you see this game object over here, you will see if I enable the skeleton over here, let me start closing. Okay, basically this model inside has I've rigged the skeleton. Of course I didn't bother having hands and whatnot, okay, because it's already too hard to rig a skeleton of its own, okay, especially stuff like this. So basically the skeleton is on the X-ray layer. Everything else that is not a skeleton is on the default layer or any other layer you might want to have. So we need a script that differentiates between the meshes that have to do with the skeleton and the meshes that have to do with the above, well, basically all the other meshes. And this is where the takedown reference comes into play. We also need to store the animator. So we have these two lists. We also have a black material to assign when we are changing into skeleton. And if we want the model to initialize it on start. On the dummy game objects, I want them to initialize on start, so that's why I'm using it over here. When you have an actual AI, this will not be you won't use this one. Okay, you will initialize, you will call the init from inside your enemy AI script. So, and on start of takedown references, what we do, what to initialize basically is say clear both lists, because you might call this one more than once, assign the animator, and then get all the skin mesh renderers that are inside your under your game object. Okay, and for each game object, for each skin mesh renderer you find, assign the name, the whole name. Okay, basically this is how we differentiate. I've set up my skeleton, all the skeleton parts, to start with SKL in the start. Okay, so basically I'm checking the names, and if it finds a skin mesh renderer with name that starts with a prefix of SKL, then that means we have a skeleton, so we know where to add it. So we save the name, we start sectioning it, So we split the string over here with every underscore we find using string split options, okay, and remove empty entries. And we check if the length of this array is 2, then that means we have a prefix, the first one, and the ID. Okay, the ID we can use this a bit later. So we basically check, and if the prefix equals of SKL, that means it's a skeleton mesh renderer, then we create a new entry for our bone list class. Our bone list class is very simple. This class, bone ID, the actual game object for the bone, and if its status, if it's destroyed or not destroyed by not actually destroy the game object, but I've rigged this one for his teeth. When he gets the punch in the face, I'm basically breaking his teeth. So I want to know if I've actually broken the teeth or not. So okay, that's why I need to know if they are destroyed or not, because we are opening and closing the skeleton. We might want to know what is exactly the status. Now, of course, in other games like Sniper Elite, they do not actually use this. They actually break the whole mess, and they do it a lot more different, but that requires a lot more other stuff. Anyway, the regular meshes is just a place we store the skin mesh renderer and their previous material. And the regular mesh, we also have this into a list. So we know it's a skeleton skin mesh renderer. We create a new list, we assign the game object, we assign the ID, and we add it to the list. If it doesn't have the prefix of SQL, it's a regular mesh, so we create a new entry for the regular mesh, we assign the renderer, and we assign the material it has. We want to save the materials because we turn the materials to black to all the other when we want to have basically the X-ray mode. Okay, and we add it into the list. If the section we have over here does not have two parts, then it's a regular mesh, then assign it over here, and then we call the function to close the skeleton. Now, to close the skeleton, basically goes for its bone it has, and it closes. Then it calls the revert materials, which in turn goes into the regular mesh and reassigns on the renderers the materials we have just stored. To open the skeleton, we go basically into every bone we have just stored. If it's not destroyed, then we set it to true, and then we say change materials to black. Change materials to black, as you can guess, goes into every regular mesh we have stored and change the material to a black material which we assign in the inspector. Revert materials, we saw what this, and if you want to change the layer, it goes and says for all the regular meshes we have stored, change the game object layer to the one we are passing, to the integer you are passing, and then go find all the mesh renderers you can find, like objects and whatever we have enabled at that point, okay, by using get components concealer mesh renderer, and you take that and make it into change the layer also, and you will see where we need this. Okay, so basically this is the takedown references which we need to know to pass into our own cutscene. Back again, we saw where we are passing the two references and what we are actually passing. Okay, and this works for the takedown. So we initialized our timeline. Now we need to start actually initializing the characters and the controls and all that. Now, at first we're going to use the current timeline to change the camera target to 0, to the dummy camera target. Okay, if we do not do that, then the camera is going to be looking, the first place is going to be looking will always be the last one it was saved. So if it's the first takedown you are doing, then it's going to be vector 3.0. We initialize the particles, and this basically calls this function, which we pass the takedown. It finds the particles we have created from the inspector. Okay, it assigns the particles for takedown. It assigns over here, so we're not using this all the time. And then we say, we assign a new game object with a particle game object. If that game object is null, then it goes and instantiates. If on our entry into the particle list our particles have zero length, then that means we need to go and actually assign the particles inside our particle array. Okay, then we reassign the particle game object to be the game object we are using. So basically this will run the first time you create the game object. The second time, since you already have this particle, it's not going to instantiate it. It's just going to go and place it either on a bone or just change the target transform. So if you are to place it on a bone, you say that for the particle entry target transform, if it's a player bone, use the animator we have stored on the player references and use the get bone transform and pass the bone we have set up in the inspector. Or if it's not a player bone we want as a target transform, then assign it to the enemy. Then simply go and reparent it into the target transform we have set up over here. Set it the target position we want it to have, and also set it the reset its rotation, or you can use the P target rotation instead of target position over here. Okay, then we want to change the enemy's rotation, the enemy transform rotation, to have the same as the player for the animations to play correct. Okay, and if you have more cases where if you actually have an AI into your enemy and you're not using a dummy, you should probably disable it over here. Okay, otherwise the enemy might actually move, or he might actually change the rotation after you have fixed this one over here. Then we need to find the wall position we want to place our player for the enemy to look correctly, and to do that we need to change from local position to wall position the offset we have set it up on the takedown info. We do that by using transform direction from the enemy's transform. Then we also need, since this just returns the direction, we also need to apply the enemy's position, and we have the wall position we want our player to sit on. Then we can start a new coroutine we're going to see, which is going to let the target let the player to the target position and then play the animations. And that position will be the wall position, and T is the actual takedown because we take a few references from here. And we have initialized our takedown. So let to target position, we'll play this one. This is the coroutine. We have the destination and we have our origin. We also have our percentage, and while the percentage is lower than 1, if the current timeline says jump cut, lerp directly over there, then the first time you run, make the percentage to be right to 1. Else, just add to the percentage by time.delta time multiplied by the speed value, and change the player's position to have the new lerp we are doing from destination and the percentage we add over here. Yield return null, and when all this ends, we can come and say enable the camera animation, which holds the animation that has the actual name, that holds the events basically. Okay, enable that and start playing the camera and start playing the animation, because the camera rig, this animator starts from empty. Okay, and this holds the events we want to have on the cutscene. And you also need to transition it back to the empty state, otherwise it's going to loop and it's going to keep playing the events and so on. Okay, then basically you initialize the timeline so you can play the events at the exact same time you want your keyframes of the animator to play, and then go say to the player animator, play the animation we have stored into our takedown with the stored crossfade timer we have created. Wait for seconds and we pass the delay if we want to have a delay on the enemy, and then play the enemy's animation. Okay, using the info of we have stored into the position. So basically, yeah, it might feel a bit confusing, but it really isn't. Just lerps the target and plays the animations. What might be confusing is that you have all the events that are going to play on the animator. So basically the camera, zoom in, move there, do that, play that, all this, enable the X-ray, break the teeth of the opponent and all that. All these are events. We can think of them as an animation based created just for the camera. Okay, in the end we're actually going to see how we can set up a new animation right from scratch just for the camera. So moving on, we saw how to initialize the particles, how to initialize the init takedown holders, how to initialize the takedown. If we want to close the takedown, which is a function we call from before, from another script. Okay, we enable the main camera rig, we reset the field of view of the camera, we also need to reset the field of view of the X-ray camera, we set up the positions to be what we know or what we already know. Okay, we assign the previous stored camera position, we also reset its rotation. The pivot where we actually want to parent is under the first game object of the pivot, if you remember, because we had camera shake. Then we also reset the X-ray camera. Okay, but we also need to close the X-ray camera. We close all the takedowns, so basically go into each list entry we have into our takedown list and disable the holder so the scripts are not playing basically, and reset all our variables we need to reset. You want to close when you want to close the takedown. Now if we have initialized the takedown, what left is to do is actually play the takedown. So if we have assigned the current timeline, and that current timeline is a cinematic takedown, then run the tick of the current timeline. So if it's not cinematic, it's just going to play the animations over here. It's going to wait till those animations play, and when those animations play, we have the closed takedown animator straight behavior. So in my player over here I have not over here, on the actual base layer. Okay, because it's running over here. If you select this when you are not running, okay, close takedown animator state behavior, which is simply this one, just goes and finds the takedown player component and calls another script which is called end takedown. And that end takedown comes over here, comes into the takedown cinematic and calls the close all takedowns. So now let's go and see the takedown timeline, which is this one, where we left off on the tick. Okay, we have our target transform. The target position will be the target transform position, where we want our camera to look. Our main camera helper will lerp the camera helper position to the position we want onto our target position, basically, where we have set over here. We store the delta time, our own delta time, because main delta. Okay, we have our own time manager. And here's where if we want to have slow motion, we need to go into each animator we are using, both of the player, enemy, and the camera animation, so the events fire correctly on the correct time, and change their speed to be the same as our own time scale. Okay, so basically with this we can pretty much make it go slow motion or normal time and all that. Okay, then on our percentage we add to the delta, but we also need to move with the same speed. So here's where we need to know the total length of the animation. So we say add the time.delta time into the percentage of the camera, but subdivided with the total length of the takedown manager. So no matter how big the path of the camera is, okay, then it's always going to move at the same speed. Of course, you can change the speed of the camera with a variable and just add it over here. Okay, that's entirely up to you. Now, if the percentage is higher than 1, then make it 1. If the percentage is lower than 0, make it 0. This is just to avoid a few errors. If the camera position, the camera path, we use basically get point at, and this needs to add a few checks. Not get point at, I think it was. Yeah, you will see an error sometimes because this script is a little bit it has a bit of an error, and let me go find it. Yeah, on get point inside the Bezier curve script, you will need to add a check that if the p1 equals null, then return a vector 3 0. Okay. But the position might return vector 3 0, but we do not want our camera to, even if it's just for one frame, to look towards vector 3 0. So if the camera position is not vector 3 0, then only then change the camera's position, the camera's rig position, to be the target position we have over here, and make our camera look at the main camera helper. So basically this is what moves the camera around and what makes it rotate to look towards the target we want to have. So the other thing that we only need to set in this script is basically create all the variables we want to use, all the functions basically we want to use on events. So change timescale, change field of view, play event, break bone, play particle, change depth of field, return bone, we basically use it on break bone, change camera target, and open skeleton and close skeleton, we use these ones from break bone basically. Oh yeah, I think we actually use this one. Yeah, we not use that, we play an event. So play event is basically uses an invoke and it passes a string name, so I can come into my camera, into the events of the camera. Let me open the animation. Let's also lock this one. And I have this play event, so I can pass the name of the function, which in this case is openSkeletonEnemy, and it's going to call this function, which in turn, if the takedown is X-ray, okay, then it's going to play. It's going to go to the enemy reference of the open skeleton of the enemy skeleton, and it's going to open that skeleton, as we talked before. And for the player, because you are enabling a game object that renders on top of all the other game objects. This might not look correctly, especially if your player is in front of the enemy. So what I do is go to the player game object and change his layer to actually be the X-ray layer 2. So for every mesh our own player has, it's also going to render at the same level as the skeleton. Okay, so it basically looks like you're only X-raying the enemy. Close skeleton is pretty much the same. Goes into over all the references, closes the skeleton, closes the player skeleton, and changes the layer to be the default layer to the player. So basically we need to go into each one of these and see them up. So what I'm doing over here is basically to read the timeline. I have on start, I'm changing the camera target to the head. So basically lerps from his hips to the camera will look from his hip to the head. Okay, and I should probably reset this one. Let's dock it over here, and of course you'll get errors. Let's hit play, and that's probably because of this one. Let's start game. Yeah, sure, whatever. Alright, so takedown holder, takedown. Probably not a wise idea. Yeah. And Unity, of course, bugged because we have this logged, which is great. Let me try and work this thing. And of course Unity needed to be restarted to get rid of that bug. So let's hit play once again. Let's wait to load. Game, whatever. Let's go find. Let's mute the audio. So up till here, what happened is it lerped the character from here to here, and when it ended, it changed the camera position to be based on the path. It made both of these characters to play the animations. And as I was saying, okay, it started focusing on the hips of this enemy, and running first, it changes the camera target to zoom, and you can see the camera moving from to the top. Okay, it looks towards the head of the enemy. Change depth of field is basically changing the values of the depth of field, as the name suggests. And the next thing it's going to do is also change the time scale. If you see right now, it's actually in slow motion. Okay, so it has run this event. The next one is changing it again to make for a bit of dramatic effect. Okay, so the hit needs to be fast so that it feels that it has weight behind it. And then it also changes the field of view. It makes the camera to zoom in, basically. Then it's going to play the first event, which is the open skeleton enemy. It has played that, but since it's not an X-ray animation, I do not have ticked it. It will not show. Then it's going to play the event to break bone, but of course, since it's also not X-ray, it will not show. But if it was, it's basically going to go and disable the teeth bone, but the teeth mesh renderer actually. And it also has time scale of, it's also, when it breaks the teeth, basically it changes the time scale to, it will also make it to be slow motion. Continuing on, it's going to change the focus, the next event, to the don't want this, to the ring finger of my player, and you will see it. And I think, yeah, it needs to be reinitialized because it takes that I click this stuff and it takes that I did changes, so that will not work. Yeah, Unity is not always fun to work with. Of course, there are other assets that might help your job, make it made easier to, if you want to make just cutscenes, but I'm telling you, it's not really that hard. Anyways, so let's see it first. Okay, it changes the camera target. Change the camera target to the ring finger of my player. It changes the zoom and also changes the depth of field to bring into focus the hand of and the knife, basically. Changes from slow motion to normal motion and also plays the particle. Okay, slow motion, out of slow motion, and all that. And all that can also be read into all the events I have over here. Now, I do not need to have the same length as my animation, but since I probably want to change stuff until all the animation has played, okay, I probably just want to have do stuff over here. So basically, after doing all the slow motion, playing particles and all that, I'm just moving back the field of view. I'm just setting back also the depth of field, and finally, just for on the end, just change the field of view once again. So let's see on our scripts each function we're going to use. Change time scale. We pass the time scale. This is the time scale, our own time scale, okay? From our own time manager. We set up the target scale, the current time scale we have, and the t, and while t is lower than 1, we add to the t, we lerp from current target to target value, and if it's not a cinematic takedown, this is important, we change the time scale to the one we are passing over here. If it is a cinematic takedown. If it's not a cinematic takedown, we do not want to affect the time scale at all, so we basically do not want to do anything over here. Change field of view. As the name suggests, we simply change the field of view. We do a lerp from the current value of the field of view of the camera and to the target value we want to have. Okay. And we also need to do changes if it's a cinematic takedown. But if it's also an X-ray takedown, we need to go into the camera, the X-ray camera, and change the field of view also. Okay, and gear terminal. Play an event. We saw that. Just call invoke with a string name and 0 delay. Break bone. Bone list. Return bone with bname. And here's where the bone ID comes into play. we go into the enemy references, we go into our bone list, and we search for the target ID we want to pass. And we return that bone. We return it, and if it's not null, so we actually found that bone, we deactivate it and we say it's destroyed, and we also play particle. Okay, it's a nice way, it's a sure way to know that we need to play a particle. So the first entry in our particle list, we initialize from the start as 0, but I know that the first particle I have on my list, it's the one that has the blood, and it's going to be placed on the head of the enemy. Okay, and basically for every particle we have stored over there, just play them. Okay, because if you're breaking a bone, there's probably a bit of blood. And we just saw the play particle 2 function. Change depth of field. We have a new script that controls the depth of field of the camera, and this goes into your main camera, where you have the depth of field. Okay, control depth of field and assign the depth of field over here directly. The set manager for the player, basically, depth of field and all that. These are the depth of field values. We can save them over here. And oops, let me see. We can say I basically have different cases, or I could just have them an array, but okay, it's nice to know which one you want to assign. Of course, you can also assign this directly to the timeline and do the changes from there. Okay, on start, just save the default values, what you're using as default values, and on update, if you have states null, then go find the free camera look script, and the target we have on our free camera look is also the player. Basically, go find the player, and if that states says it's not a dummy model, if you remember on the previous video, the dummy model is if it's a dummy model, then on fixed update it does not update any other script we have into our player. Okay, so basically it's a dummy that can play the simple animation, and we can do everything else we want to do without having it affect the input and all that. Okay, and we were control DOF. Basically, go set up the values and pass the function to change the depth of field values. If the character is aiming, if the player is aiming, change the depth of field values with a case of 1, which is this one. Now, if we also store the current status, and if the current status equals if the status we want to change equals the current status, we simply return. Okay, if you're not aiming, then use the default values. But in case the depth of field values, if the player model is a dummy model, then you can call the case 2 and 3. Okay, case 2 is basically if it's in cinematic mode, then just close the depth of field of the camera, and if it's on a close-up mode, just focus on what's right in front of the camera. Okay, and then store the current status. To actually change the values, simply do a coroutine, pass the values, store them for each one from the current and to the target you want to have. And if you have a focus transform, but I'm not using it anywhere, okay, and then do a T, basically a lerp, and use the same T, so they all change at the same time. And for ease to find it easily, just make this a singleton. Okay, we saw this one too. Let's go. Yeah, we were over here. Takedown timeline. Okay, that's how you change the depth of field. You might not even have depth of field in your game, but anyway. If you want to change the camera target, you simply pass the integer. You pass the target value, and we can say find the camera target list that we have. From the list we have the entry we want to have. Okay, and we check if we want the camera target to be assigned on a bone, and if that bone is from the player, then use the animator of that player to get bone transform and basically get that bone, the transform of that bone. Else, do so for the enemy. If we do not want to be assigned on a bone, then just assign the target transform we have over there. If also it says that you want to be jumping directly there on the info jump to, then simply say main camera helper position to be just also change, not only change the target transform, change also the camera helper's position. Okay, basically this covers everything you need to know on how to set up both a cutscene and basically, yeah, this was mostly for cutscenes and make it more cinematic than an actual takedown, because to do the takedown you basically need to do only this coroutine, which is led to the position behind or in a position that the animations will look correct, and then play the animations. Okay. All the other rest was for cinematic takedowns. And let's see the part where the player actually controls the takedown, and we're going to do that from side play mode. And what do we forget? Yeah, we forget to delete the third person controller, I think. Oops, yeah. We actually deleted the camera holder. Controllers, camera holder. Yeah. It might look a bit confusing at first, but trust me, it's not really that confusing. So, I'm behind the enemy. Okay, I'm inside this collider. So, what this collider has a simple script that's called pass the reference. And to pass the reference, we store on start the reference for the dummy. Now I'm only drag and dropping it since the dummies are the same. When we have an AI script for the enemies, we're going to be assigning it from there. On trigger enter, checks if a collider has a takedown player script, so that means it's the player, and if it does, then assigns the takedown reference to that takedown player. On trigger exit, checks if the actual what is also is assigned as enemy reference to the takedown player script is the one you have stored over here, and if it is, then make it null. So let's go see the takedown player. The takedown player, not pick, I want to go to definition, goes into our third person shooter controller. After the takedown references, we want to have the script takedown player. Takedown player, what we need to know? We need to know the state manager, the input handler, the takedown manager, the player references, and we also need to know the enemy references, but we also do not have to make them show in the inspector. The crosshair canvas, and a place to store the previous weapon we had. If we have initialized the text and the UI text basically, and if we want to do the takedown, the actual takedown we want to do, and if it's an X-ray or not. On start, we get the reference for the takedown cinematic. We also get the reference for the crosshair. We also get the reference for a player. We initialize a player references. Okay. And we set the takedown manager main camera rig to be the one we use from the third person shooter controller. We assign the game object. The main camera we just use camera.main.transform. The crosshair manager, we can use the crosshair manager get distance and get the parent, which basically is the canvas that has the crosshair. And we also take the reference to state manager and input handler. Now, if on fixed update we say that there is an enemy reference assigned, we go and say, if we haven't yet initialized the text, enable the UI text, change the text to press X for takedown, and we have initialized the text. If the enemy reference are null and we have previously initialized the text, close the UI text game object and say we haven't yet initialized the takedown. So if we have an enemy references set and we press the X key, of course you can assign your own input manager as we saw in the previous video. Then we can check if our takedown manager is not running the takedown, so if it's not already running the takedown, we set up the reference to the takedown manager with the ones we assign over here. Okay, if it's an X-ray or if it's a takedown, we disable the input handler. We say to the state manager that it's a dummy model. We disable the crosshair manager. We also need to make sure that we do not have any movement, any velocity on a rigid body. So you can go into the character movement script and make the rigid body public so you can access its velocity to be vector 3.0. If you forget to do this, if the player presses a button and presses X, the animation might play, but because the rigid body will also have a bit of velocity, then it's going to slide. The other thing you can do is make it directly a kinematic. Previous weapon, we store from the weapon manager the previous weapon, and we say switch weapon with target weapon, and we pass basically from the takedown manager, from the takedown list, from the active takedown we have over here, which we indicate from the index. For that timeline, the takedown weapon we have set in the inspector. We reinitialize the player references, and I don't know why, but I probably had a good reason to reinitialize them. Okay, and then we go and assign to the takedown manager the player references. We assign the enemy references we have set over here, and we say run the takedown on the takedown manager, and it's going to play all that. Now when it ends, from the animator state behavior, it's going to call the end takedown, and we also debug it that it ends. Okay, say to the takedown manager close takedown, input handler, re-enable the input handler, make the dummy model to be false, change the weapon from the weapon manager to the weapon you had previously, and say to the takedown manager you're not running the takedown anymore, and reset the enemy reference to null, re-enable the crosshair canvas, and finally set up the cursor lock state to also be once again locked. Okay, so basically this is we covered everything we had to cover. Now one last thing is that on your particles, on the actual particles you are creating, if this was here, yeah, it's not this guy. Oops. Let's play it once again because hotfix usually is a bother. Now, on the actual particles that are instantiated over here, we also have a new script that is particle speed. It sets up, it gets all the particle system, and it also gets the reference to a time manager. Okay, we set up the reference over here, and on update, for every particle we have over here, it simply changes the playback speed to be controlled by the current time scale we have. Okay, simple stuff. So it basically makes the particles to play in slow motion or not. Okay, and it will do all this. So we covered everything. Let's try and make a new cinematic, a new takedown cinematic. I'm going to go into the level, and I'm going to take my controller, drop it in the scene, and have it over here. Now, since I already know basically the distance between my player and the enemy, I won't be doing that, so I'm going to go, let's go into the takedown holder, let's close these ones, but I'm going to duplicate the first one, and I'm going to name it takedown 2. I'm going to create, there's no need to create it right now. I'm going to say on my camera path, I do not want it to move from there, I want you to go from the right side and do something like, I don't know, something like this, and I can move this one from over here. So basically the camera will do something like this, and let's make it so like this. Okay, basically set up the camera path I want it to take. Let's come over here. The total length, I know since it's the same animation, that's going to be 4.2. I need to know, I need to basically say now, going to my takedown camera events, open the animation screen, and I'm going to create a new clip. Takedown 2. And we have over here. Now we can lock it, and you will see that it creates a new animation state inside over here. Okay, make the transition back to the empty state and leave everything as it is. Let's go back to game. Now I'm going to go and find my takedown animations, executions. Let's set it up from the player, and I'm going to get this one, get the preview out of here, and have it look like this. Okay, so I don't know if, it's going to go away, so that's not good. So I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to lock this one, but I'm going to add a new tab mode, the inspector, and I'm going to go and select the actual takedown. So what we have over here, we basically have a place to, this is for the enemy, so that won't work. Let's unselect this one, let's select the player, lock it again, go to the other inspector, select the new takedown. Okay, so we can see the frames over here, and we can basically initialize it with this. Keep in mind that the samples are 60, so that means 60 FPS, 60 frames per second, and this one I think is on 30 FPS, and if you see that after 30 it goes to 1, that means it's 30 FPS. So we'll change the sample to 30, and we can say, okay, we start from here. Now, before we do that, actually, let's fix the camera transfers. let's not bother with the X-ray. And for the particles we're going to keep the same, okay, since it basically is a punch and he stabs him in the gut. It's going to instantiate the blood particle we have over here. It's going to place it on a bone, on the head, and it's basically the enemy's head. Same for the other particle, the blood particle, okay, placed on a bone, and that bone is the spine. Jump cut and cinematic takedown is, yeah, we want to be a cinematic takedown, and we also want it to be a jump cut. Camera targets. Let's have 2 camera targets. Let's make first focus on the head of the enemy. So I'm going to select head and click assign bone. Then let's focus on the head of the player, the second camera target. Assign bone from player. Then focus on the chest of the enemy. Okay, so basically I preset all the targets I can use. Of course the first one is going to be the dummy one, so I'm going to set this one as chest and make it so that it's something like this. Okay, from player chest and go back to spine or something like that of the enemy. So I have my targets, I have my particles. Now I need to say when we want to do what. Except for the first entry inside my target list, all the other do not need to have a specific case. So we're starting, so we're looking at the chest of the enemy. When we're hitting over here or something like that, and before we hit there, so something around over here, you can set up the frames, the exact frames from over here. Okay, frame 25, so let's say frame 20. Now you can also go directly to the not 420, into time, I think 420 by 30, that should be uh, 420. Yeah, anyway. Okay, so let's go 20 frame. Add animation event. Change camera target. Go to the head of the enemy. Before you do that, add another animation event. But change depth of field to status 3 or whatever. Let's also change make it to be slow motion. Change time scale. Something like 0.1 should be enough. Before you hit him, so around over here. Change time scale to be back at 1. And so on. Okay, so with this basically you set up all the events. And you can find the frames that can happen from over here, from the animation preview, and you set up basically your whole cinematic. Let's close this. Okay, we close the record. Of course you need to add a few more animations, a few more events to make it look good. So what I need to do over here is close this one, change the timeline name to Takedown 2, so it plays these events, and I can change the camera path to the new camera path. The camera rig, I can also make sure that I'm using the correct camera rig. The animator will be this one. Okay, take down weapon, can have the knife, or I can make him enable a different weapon simply by placing that weapon on my takedown. Okay, takedown. If I change my weapon, instead of the knife, then it's going to enable that one. Let's close that. So I've set up everything in my takedown timeline, everything that I needed to do. I'm going to re-enable all the other ones, and I'm going to go into my takedown manager and take the first takedown, the new takedown, and add it into my I'm going to add another entry to the takedown list, and I'm only going to assign the takedown to holder. Okay, on the game object I do not have to assign the timeline, although I could. There's not really any point. So I'm going to apply the prefab, and of course to play I need to come from the main menu. Save. Let's hit play. Yeah, of course this takedown is going to be a bit horrible. Okay, since we did not spend nearly that much time with it. I'm going to change on my third person controller the takedown I want to play. I want to play the third one, so I'm going to add the 2. Let's maximize 2 to witness the horrible animation in full screen. Okay, I'm pressing X, and you will see that it plays a different cinematic, it plays the different events, and it also didn't have a knife. It has enabled the pistol instead of the knife. Okay, and this will play every time. So basically that's what that's how a takedown is made, or a cinematic takedown if you will, is made. And let's talk a bit about, how to do the X-ray and how to do the skeleton. Now of course in AAA games it's mostly done with shaders, but the modeling is pretty much pretty similar. You have your game object, your skin mesh render with fewer parts of course. Okay, and you have your skeleton inside that is also on its own layer. Okay, so basically you do not have to go and create all your models like this to have a skeleton inside. Let's open it up in Blender. Okay, you do not actually have to use the same model. You only need a skeleton that is rigged. That was spooky. You only need a skeleton that is rigged on the same rig as the one you are using into all your models. Okay, so in my case I had my base model where I did everything. Okay, and inside it had the rig that I'm using in all my models. So inside I can go and create, and you see that I've actually have different eyes for the skeleton and for the actual face. Okay, so basically I can go into any of my models, and that looks pretty funny, like this. Or let me drop a different model that didn't have. Okay, I can go. If I go now into my into his cloth, where the mesh that has the cloth, or it doesn't actually need to be the actual cloth. just a skin mesh renderer that has the root bone and all that, if I duplicate it, now it's important to make it a duplicate because there is a Unity bug that if you create the game object and you create the skin mesh renderer sometimes and assign, even if you assign everything correct, sometimes the animator will not bind into that game. Okay, if I duplicate that, and I can go now and change the mesh with the one I'm using, with the skeleton one. Okay, so right now it has a skeleton. Of course I need to assign the new materials for the skeleton. Skeleton body, not this one. Okay, this one. I'm going to delete these ones because they are not rigged properly, and I think these ones aren't deleted. Although this looks like a Ubisoft game, to be honest, so it's probably a feature. So, okay, I have a different model, and I basically assign the skeleton to all my models. I need to add the prefix so I know that it's the skeleton mesh. Close this one, and let's actually make this a dummy. I'm going to copy the animator components and assign it. So to make this one a dummy, we also need to have the takedown collider, so I'm just going to copy paste, and I'm going to reset it and bring it a little bit back, and just to see something, I'm going to also on this guy enable his pants. Over here, takedown collider. Now we only need to pass the takedown references. Okay, we have them over here. We only need to assign also the black material, which is simply, okay, just a dark material, nothing fancy. And we also need to make it init on start. So let's save, and let's also yeah, I think we are ready to save and move on. Let's go back in the main menu, hit play, and we're near 2 hours, but I think we did some pretty cool stuff with this, so I think it's worth it. Let's hit play. So you see that the camera we have over here does not render the skeleton, and that is why you cannot see the skeleton. Okay, but if you click over here, the skeleton is there. Of course it's now disabled because we initialize it, but it also works. Same for the new model we have over here. So let's go to our third person controller. Let's make it an X-ray, and let's start doing the, okay, you see where it actually opens the model and so on, and that is pretty funny, to be honest. Same for the other model, and something, yeah, I forgot to reassign the takedown reference. Okay, because I copy paste the collider, it kept the position, it kept the reference for this model instead of getting the reference for that model. And just to be sure it was that, let's do it once more. Okay, bugs are easily fixable if they are reproducible. Let's pick this one, or let's pick this one, or whatever. killing the invisible man. And I forgot to set up the... God damn it. I forgot to set up the X-ray. So basically I need to go into my takedown collider and assign the new takedown references. So I'm going to save that, then go back to main menu, and for one last time I'm going to click to start main menu, new game, I'll select a character, play, and I still forget to do the X-ray. Okay, it plays the first animation. Let's turn the X-ray on. Third person controller, X-ray. Something was wrong with the camera over there. Let's see if this one will play. Yeah, this one plays, so it was probably a problem. The skeleton still rendered, but I think I forgot to set. Yeah, I forgot to set the skeleton on the other guy. On this guy, I forgot to set the skeleton to be on the X-ray layer. So probably this one will be the actual final time. We're going to set play. Let's set it an X-ray too. So I think with this one, this is how you will actually understand it better. Okay, it runs the events, it enables the skeleton, it breaks the teeth, although if it's not always noticeable. Okay, plays correctly. Plays correctly. And let's make it the other. So I'm going to add my killing spree over here. You know what to do. This was a long video. I do not even have to explain anymore how much time all this stuff take. I'm planning also a lot more cool stuff with this project. So, show your support, like, subscribe, Patreon and all that stuff, Gumroad or whatever you prefer. And I'll see you next time with some more killing and all that. So, I'll see you next time.